How is the woman of Revelation chapter 12 nourished in the wilderness? This is an epic question, and in this video, we're going to answer it. To begin, let's review what the Revelation chapter 12 account said regarding the woman being in the wilderness. Reading from verse 13, we see that when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. So this looks like it came out of some mythology or, folklore or something like that, but this is actually quite real, and we're going to really talk about what this verse is trying to say by searching other passages of the scriptures. So to begin, I want us to kind of talk a little bit about the wilderness idea. What does it mean that the woman would be sent into the wilderness? What is the significance of that? Well, if you're thinking about a wilderness, you see that the wilderness is a dry, barren, almost lifeless place. It's empty. When you're in the wilderness, you kind of feel isolated and so on. And why would someone then be nourished in a kind of negative environment? Well, the thing is, being in this kind of environment disciplines you, humbles you, gives you a kind of courage and resolve that you wouldn't otherwise have. You see that people like Jesus Christ and John the Baptist, before they were sent out to really, preach the gospel and fulfill the mission that God had for them, they were sent to the wilderness, right? In fact, if you consider the account of John the Baptist in Luke chapter 1 verse 80, it says that he was actually prepared in the wilderness for the thing God wanted to use him for. It says that, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit and was in the deserts until the day of his shewing onto Israel. In addition to that, if you read Matthew chapter 4 verse 1, you see that Jesus Christ was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And we have a whole video talking about that, so I'm not going to go into the details of that. But the wilderness has that positive effect. And David too, when he was in the wilderness, he picked up a lot of battle skills, how to use weapons and so on, how to protect himself, how nature works and so on, which is why in Psalm 144 verse 1 he said, "Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight." In a way, the wilderness is like a refining pot. So you're nourished through this harsh environment. If you read Zechariah chapter 13 verses 8 and 9, you see God talking about how I will bring my people through the fire and will refine them as silver is refined and will try them as gold is tried. And as Job said in Job chapter 23 verse 10, when God had finished trying him, he would come forth as gold. So we kind of see how the wilderness plays this positive role. And we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but I just want to briefly talk about who this woman actually is and who the dragon is and what the wings of a great eagle are and so on. Well, to start off, the dragon is Satan the devil. That comes from Revelation chapter 20 verse 2, so that one's kind of straightforward. And the wings of the great eagle, we can understand that from Exodus chapter 19 verses 4 and 5, where God was like, "You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you onto myself." So it's a symbol of God's protection, sustenance, and care that he gives to his children. To understand the symbolism behind the woman, though, that one's a little bit more interesting. Basically, women in the Bible often symbolize nations or institutions or ideas that have adherents or followers, right? For example, Samaria and Jerusalem were considered to be women in Ezekiel chapter 23, verses 2 to 4, because they had citizens, they had children. Israel was also considered to be feminine because they were a wife of God. If you read Isaiah chapter 54 verse 5, Jeremiah chapter 3 verse 1, chapter 2 verses 2 to 3, Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 8 to 63, and so on. So women, the fact that they give birth and the fact that they're married to men and so on, are being used symbolically here to talk about spiritual ideas, right? The fact that God has a relationship with man and so on. So they're being used in this light. So the woman of Revelation chapter 12 is symbolizing the purpose of God that children of God belong to, right? But this woman has not been able to give birth for a very long time because I'm talking symbolically right now. Ever since the world became sinful in Genesis chapter 3 verses 1 to 6, the purpose of God has never really been able to flower the way it did in the Garden of Eden because Satan has corrupted the world with wars and poverty and bad governance and all kinds of stuff. That's why the Bible considers him to be the God of this world. If you read 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4 and so on. So ever since then, righteousness has not really been able to flower. In other words, this woman is barren. She doesn't have a lot of children. That's why people who are righteous are persecuted, because they're few in number. If you read Luke chapter 13, verses 23 to 24. And if you read Isaiah chapter 54, verse 1, Isaiah the prophet was telling us that would not last forever. Just as Hannah, by the grace of God, eventually gave birth to children, this metaphorical or spiritual woman would eventually give birth to children too. He was like, "Sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear, and break forth into singing, and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, said the Lord." So it's saying this desolate or barren woman would eventually have children. The purpose of God would eventually have glory. People would worship God in sincerity and truth. People would start walking in righteousness, and the world would now become a righteous world instead of it being a wicked world. If you read passages like Isaiah chapter 65 verses 17 to 25 and many more. So how does this all connect back to the Revelation chapter 12 that we started with? Well, the woman being in the wilderness symbolizes the condition that children of God are in now, actually. Because if you look at the spiritual state that the world is in, it is a kind of wilderness. It's a little bit like a famine because secularity is beginning to grow, spirituality is gradually declining, and I don't mean that there are less Christians in number, but it's becoming harder to truly believe that spirits exist, that God exists because of all the distractions and because education now is teaching that God doesn't exist and so on. So it's becoming a little bit more difficult now, and it's not going to get easier. It's going to get even harder. So it's providing a kind of harsh environment for children of God, actually, if you read Amos chapter 8, verses 11 and 12 and so on. But at the same time, this harsh environment is actually a plus to children of God because it refines them. It makes them stronger Christians. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it refines them in a way that will allow them to live righteously in the world to come. And not only that, but God is also protecting his children through this time by making sure that they have sufficient wisdom and knowledge to be able to understand what's going on. As Daniel said, none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 10. So the woman is currently in this state, which represents children of God, having to endure many trials and temptations as they try to keep their spirituality intact. But the Bible is saying that God will be with them, so that spirituality in its truest form, not the hypocritical form where people just attend church services but then they live a completely different life. Spirituality in its truest form will be preserved throughout this period so that in the world to come, it will be there in full form. If you read Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 34, and at that point, the entire world will be righteous. The dragon or Satan the devil will be gone, and this woman will be living in full glory and peace and happiness to the glory of God. So that's where I'm going to stop on talking about the woman and how she's nourished in the wilderness and so on. I know this is a very complicated subject. Complicated because it requires familiarity with all passages of the scriptures. So I kind of want to round off this video by saying that to really understand what the Bible is saying, we have to be familiar with everything. Not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or the Psalms or Proverbs. Everything. Jeremiah, Leviticus, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Amos the prophet, Obadiah, every single book, every single chapter, every single line we have to be familiar with, because that's when we begin to understand how all of them connect with each other. And that's when the true meaning of the Bible comes out to us. So if you enjoyed this video and learned something new today, then I would appreciate if you click the like button and also the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when I come back with another video, click the notification bell. Have a good day, and I'd like to see you in the next video.